Hey everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Field Facts with Forrest. I'm your host, Forrest Carpenter, and I'm glad you made it back today because we're going to cover another one of our most frequently asked questions. All right, this one specifically is coming to us from Logan Damon down in Stuttgart, Arkansas, and it's regarding hunting specklebellies in the lower Mississippi Flyway. He wants to know, he's a duck hunter and he's just getting into hunting specklebellies down around the Stuttgart, Arkansas area, and he's basically looking for just some general information. He's wondering how he sets up in fields, whether you're looking for a little bit of tow water, completely dry fields, and he's also curious about what he ought to be using for spreads, whether he ought to be using just specklebelly decoys or specks and snows mixed, and we're going to go ahead and we're going to cover all of that stuff. Now, getting started, when it comes to hunting specklebellies, my first piece of advice and the most important thing that I find is that you need to be hidden, all right? Everybody gives cranes the credit for being the best eyes in the sky when it comes to waterfowl hunting, and they deserve that. Coming in a close second slot, though, gotta be the specklebelly. In my years of hunting waterfowl, I have never found any species of bird that will find your hide like a speck will, all right? And you guys know, heck, whether you're in Kansas or Arkansas or all the way up in Alberta chasing these specks, you have heard the dreaded sound, all right? When these geese are coming over, maybe it's a flat light day, you don't have any shadows, those specks will get to 100, 150 yards even sometimes, and they'll give you that buzz, that hey, 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 or they're saying, no, 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 everyone get out of here, all right? And typically that's because you're not hidden well enough, all right? And you might be hidden well enough to shoot Canadas, ducks, even snow geese, but these specks just have a keen eye for your hide. So make sure that you pick out the best hide you can when it comes to this, okay? Now, along with the hide, you want to keep your calling in mind, and I'm going to keep touching on this subject over and over throughout this series, especially when you're hunting an edge. Keep in mind that your calling can give away your location. So as these geese are getting closer and closer, if there's distance between you and your decoys, say you're on an edge and your decoys are 25, 30 yards out like they ought to be when you're hunting an edge, if the geese are between you and your decoys and you blow your call, those geese are going to be able to tell that the calling is coming from the wrong side of their head. So if they're expecting calls to be on the right where all the decoys are, but they hear it from the left, it's going to alert them very quickly that something's not right. Something else that you want to do as far as the hide's concerned is you want to set yourself up in a position to best hide motion. Now, if you're hunting inside the decoy spread, say you're hunting out of a white spread for specklebellies, or even just a full dark spread under ghillie blankets or something like that, you want to make sure that if you are going to be where the birds are looking, you're extremely still. If you're on an edge, say in an A-frame or layouts, it's a little easier to conceal your motion and to keep their eyes off of you. But again, being that all of these birds, waterfowl in general, are prey, they're used to looking for motion, and motion typically means danger, especially when it's coming out of the bushes. Now, the next part of this that I want to talk about is to mix dark and white decoys or to just go solely with specklebelly decoys when it comes to hunting them. Now, there's a few theories and everybody's got their own preferences. Personally, I judge it almost entirely based on what the birds around me are doing. All right, so in all my years guiding down in Texas, sometimes I would have to do what I considered to be unnatural in mixing spreads, but typically I've got the option. And when I go and match what the birds are doing, I find that I have a lot greater success. So, for you, Logan, when you're driving around and checking things out there in the Stuttgart area, I know how it is. I've driven those roads many, many times. And when you see the fields, when the specks are separating from the snow geese, and if they're doing that in your field or in fields in your area, that's a great time to go with a dark-only spread. If they're right in the middle of all the snow geese, then that's something that you'd want to mimic also. Okay, now as far as hunting dark decoys only or specklebelly decoys only when it comes to them, it's difficult to hide because typically, and again, this is all typically, specklebellies don't usually sit as tight together as snow geese do or as lesser Canadas. They're somewhere on the looser half of the spectrum. I wouldn't say they like to sit as loosely as a big greater Canada goose, unless it's a rainy gray day where they're covering the whole field and there may only be 300 or 400 of them. But they're going to be on the looser side of things, okay? So if, again, we're trying to mimic these birds and give them the most realistic spread possible, it's very difficult to hide in your spread. Therefore, I'm looking for an edge. Whether that's something that you create out in the middle of a field with an A-frame, or you've got a good brush pile that you can hide some layouts in, or some ghillie blankets, or even ghillie suits, or the levees. Gosh, I know the levees, a lot of times they don't keep the grass mowed quite as short. So be looking for anything in the area to create a hide. And if you've got to be 150 yards or so from where the birds are, typically I'm going to take the best hide over anything else. Rule number one is hide well. So if you're not hidden, they're not going to play. I would rather take a chance on the birds not wanting to come into the decoys because I'm 150 yards off and not have them flare, versus having every bird in the county come and look at me and flare off at 150 yards. I find that I'm far less frustrated if I may, only shoot a bird or two, but I'm well hidden and they do it right. That's just me personally, but that's typically how I like to look at it. So we've got levees, brush piles, all that stuff. If you're on an X, it also gives you the opportunity, if you're able to hide on one of those levees or brush piles, to go with a smaller spread. And right now, that seems to be the big trend down southern portion of the Mississippi Flyway. Guys are going with small, realistic spreads. They're going, between 2 and 10 dozen specklebelly decoys, maybe a few blue geese mixed in, because again, driving around looking at this stuff, I don't know why, but specks and blues mix quite a bit, and you will see a decent number of hybrids out there, so something else to keep your eye out for. But if you're able to go with a smaller spread, you can keep it loose, cover quite a bit of ground with even just 5, 10 dozen decoys, and that can be very, very successful and not break the bank when it comes to hunting a big spread. When it comes to hunting socks and specklebellies, I'm completely confident in it, especially now with our S3I specklebelly decoys. They look great. Having some of those heads up as well creates a more realistic outline, or a more realistic view of the decoys. The birds are coming in and looking. It's not just all heads down on the socks. There's a few of them that are heads up, and I know it sounds silly, but just getting to hunt over the S3I snows when they came out this year, it's remarkable the difference, both on the ground when you're down low, say like the geese would be in a high wind scenario, or when you're right overhead and working around more of a typical higher up bird's eye view looking from dive bomb 1. So socks are great, but only in the wind. I can't stress this enough. This is another thing I'm going to cover 300 times in this series. Socks are wonderful if you've got wind. No wind, no socks, period. Okay, while they look fine if you set it out and there's some wind and the wind dies, they'll hold their shape fairly well. They're never going to have the same realism as if you've got a decent breeze blowing, say 5 to 10 miles an hour, and you get those decoys bobbing just a little bit out there. It looks really, really good with just a little bit of breeze. So using those socks can be very effective. Again, like I've said in the past, make sure you mix them evenly throughout the spread. So if you've got, say, 5 dozen socks and 10 dozen silhouettes, what I like to do is build the spread with one type of decoy. So be it silhouettes or socks, then I'll go in and I'll fill in with the other type of decoy that I like to use, and make sure that you're using these socks and silhouettes fairly evenly throughout your spread, just to give it a nice, natural, even look. You don't want to have it look like you've got all your socks in one spot and your silhouettes in another and full bodies over here in another corner. So just make sure that you treat every one of them like they have the same pulling power and like they're the same amount of goose, if you will. Space them evenly. Just treat them like you would any other decoy, and you're going to have your best results with that. When it comes to mixing your spreads, it gives you a little bit more of an advantage for running traffic. So if you're mixing white and dark decoys, I like to think about it like I'm setting up a snow goose spread, but I'm adding specklebellies, and I'm using the specklebellies, those decoys, to set up and stop the dart geese. So I'll set up a full-on snow goose spread, whether that's 50 dozen or 150 dozen or 20 dozen, doesn't really matter. It's the same kind of idea. So we want to make sure that when snow goose are feeding, you can see as they work through the field, as if there's a solid winded direction, they will be working typically into the wind. The head of that mass is going to be the biggest group of geese. So that's where you're going to find your most aggressive feeding geese. They're all pushing, they're all moving towards it. You hear them kind of buzzing and groaning at each other, kind of like cows, and they're very excited about what's going on in the field. Further downwind, so you know, you've got your big head up here and you kind of taper it off downwind, spread them out. The dense area is going to mimic that feeding head, and the less dense those decoys are set, the more realistic it's going to be, because those geese towards the back maybe aren't as aggressive, I'm sorry, and maybe you know, they're family groups. Maybe it's mom and dad and a couple juvies. Maybe it's just geese that aren't as worked up. So you're going to find that typically more noise is going to be coming from the head of that spread. The geese are going to be sitting tighter, and the further downwind you go, the looser they're going to be. When I mix in dart goose decoys with that, the specklebellies are very rarely going to be as aggressive as snow geese are. So I like to kind of build my dart goose wall, if you will, or my landing area, right at the downwind side of the head of the snow goose spread. So if I'm hunting in a white spread and I'm hunting in the spread, we'll be hunting somewhere in the middle of that upwind big group of geese, so it's nice and tight. We can hide under socks, be it the you know, S3s if it's really flat, or if you've got some chairs or layouts, great time to use those S5s, those taller socks, and blend those in. But you're going to be able to hide better in those snow goose decoys, keep the specklebellies 15, 20 yards downwind of you, and have your main group of specks at the back of the main group of snow geese. Then, again with the specklebellies, taper them off downwind. Have groups of specks sitting separately than the snow geese. And you're going to see this trend in my advice a lot, and that's spread things out, make it look realistic. So those specklebellies are going to work down. They'll go all the way down there to the lower bottom downwind edge of the spread, and they'll start to crawl up the spread. And specklebellies, a lot like ducks in a dry field, like to S-curve. So whether you use a big U or a V or a J, they will go down that long leg and they will S-curve their way all the way up to you. So when they work down, make sure you stay hidden and let them work their way up. They're going to come right up to that base and that main group of specklebellies and light right there in front of you. Again, keep those decoys out in front of you away so they're not trying to sit right on you and they're not looking right at you. Try to get them to land 15, 20 yards in front of you in that main mass of specklebellies. When you're trafficking, you want to go bigger. So I always like running a lot of decoys. That's just kind of my thing. When I'm hunting specks in a traffic area, I may go as big with the snow geese included as 150 dozen. You know, that's a mega spread, and I've gotten a lot of comments about that, but you know, you guys ask what I like to use, and personally, I like seeing a big feed. When I'm watching geese feed in these fields, especially in the bottom of the flyway places like Arkansas, West Texas, Oklahoma, you're not looking at feeds typically of a couple hundred geese like you would normally throw out for a decoy spread. You're seeing thousands and thousands of geese. So even throwing a spread of 1,500 or 2,000 decoys is still smaller than what they might have come into a couple days ago. You know, you see snow goose feeds or even specklebelly and Canada feeds in West Texas, upwards of 10,000 geese. You know, it's for me, it's all about looking as realistic as I can. And a lot of times that's going big, covering most of the field, and trusting that not only is the spread realistic enough, but I trust that my calling is going to bring the geese to me along with some flagging and center them up where we want them to, as opposed to having them land way downwind. So when you're running traffic, go big. And another thing I like to do, especially, well, really only when I'm laying in the decoys, is use a flag. And there's going to be times where flagging's great. There's times where it's not going to work as well. Always have that dark flag with you. And a white flag's great to have too. But those specklebellies love a dark Canada flag. It's something they don't see a lot. People don't think about it a whole lot because no one really makes a specklebelly flag, but it creates realistic motion and it's the color that they're looking for. And if you're laying in a white spread, that dark flag is going to stand out a lot. Now, if you're hunting on an edge with a big mixed spread, that's even better because again, you can loosen things up a little bit. You don't have one really tight area where guys are laying, and basically the geese can inspect the decoys as closely as they want to, but they won't find anything wrong as long as none of your decoys have blown over or got knocked over by a dog or something like that. So I think as far as hiding is concerned, you're always going to have an advantage when hunting on an edge, but you're going to lose a little bit of distance. So again, take the best hide. If you're in a field where there's nothing at all, your best hide may be laying in the decoys. And that mixed spread's really going to give you a great opportunity to really take advantage of that. Now, something else that I want to touch on when it comes to specklebellies, especially specklebellies, is management. And this is going to get more into the personal opinion side of things. You know, I've spent a lot of years guiding specklebelly hunts, and I find that more so with specks than even with snow geese, the juvenile birds really make or break the day. So in areas like West Texas, where you're going out and you're hunting primarily specklebellies, there are times where I really am glad that I've got a lot of baby specklebellies around. Whether there's not a lot of wind or you've got a tough hide, if you've got baby specklebellies, let them come in first, the adults will follow, all right? And this is where it gets difficult, and we are gonna have more episodes that touch on etiquette and management and stuff like that in the future, but this is gonna be kind of the first installment of something like that. So my personal thoughts, and even some of my best friends disagree, but my personal thoughts is let those babies go. Let those gray-chested juvenile specks get out of the spread. If you've got a group of 10 of them in you, 10 specks in front of you, and only a couple of them have bars and they're nice, pretty adults, personally, I've found that not only do I enjoy shooting adults more, but most of my clients typically do as well. In areas where you've only got a 2 or 3 bird specklebelly limit, a lot of people are going down there to shoot a specklebelly, and often they're trying to find one to mount and take home. So for you guides who are out there just mowing into groups of specks and find guys trying to fight over the few adults that you shoot throughout the day, you might take that into consideration. It's not always about numbers, but if you can get a better quality of hunt, whether that's shooting a couple adults that are really, really pretty and having one for everybody to take home and mount, or especially bands. Frankly, I look at my lanyard and the vast majority of this, those are specks. Out of all of the banded specks that I've shot and seen shot while hunting and have friends shot, I have not once heard of a juvenile speck being banded. When they band these things, they catch them, typically they let the juveniles go because they're not going to get good data on them because people mow baby specks down and they wouldn't get any good information. So they banned breeding age males and females. Hunting's not about the bands. It sure is cool to have though, and when you're looking for trophy birds, it's another thing that just adds a cool aspect to the hunt. When you're in areas like California or Oregon, gosh, I got to go out there and hunt for the first time this year, and they've got high limits. I mean, I'm talking 10 specklebellies a day, which is a ton of anything. I mean, gosh, even if the snow goose limit was 10 a day, you wouldn't hit that limit very many days. So you're looking at a lot of birds having to come down before you get a legal bag limit. Again, my advice, if you leave some of the babies to go, let the babies come in and bring the adults in behind them, shoot the adults, those babies are going to be around all year, and they don't get that much smarter, frankly. So the more juveniles you have to lead the adults in, the better off you're going to be. Now, again, this sounds kind of crazy, and I know some of you guys out there are looking at me and calling me nuts for wanting to let good geese go, and the babies do eat really well. But I really think we ought to do that, and every trend starts somewhere. So even with the Drake's only trend in ducks and mallards mainly, that didn't start as 80% of the waterfowling population going, you know what, hey everybody, let's shoot Drakes only. They didn't all just say that spontaneously one day and now it's green only. Someone started with it, and he took a few guys out, and those guys decided they had fun just shooting Drakes, and they realized that they're doing something for conservation and waterfowl management when they started that. And that trend grew over time, and that's kind of the way I see this going with the specklebellies. The more juveniles you can save, it's going to increase your success rate in the long run. You may have a couple days where you don't shoot as many birds because all you have are babies that are coming in, but over time you're going to shoot more adults, and that's going to make it better and better over the long run as well by letting these geese get old enough to breed. And next year you're going to have more young geese as opposed to just letting the adults run rampant. Okay, so that's just, again, my personal opinion on management, but where I've hunted and down there in West Texas, I have found great success by letting the babies go in the beginning of the season. And then when you get your tough day, even if you've got clients, you're having a really rough day, again, no wind, birds are picking you out, you'll still get a few babies to come in. You can kill a few of them and get away with a good day in January, as opposed to if you've shot all the juvies, you may spend those calm days in January late in the year sitting there watching every goose in the county fly by or flare at 200 yards, which is, again, the most frustrating thing in the entire world. So not really a rant, but I'll just say rant over. That's kind of my opinion on what you ought to do, and it's something to consider. Do you really need those extra few geese? Does it make that much of a difference? Or would you be just as happy letting them go? I like thinking about it like Drakes, and I like duck hunting because I get to pick out Drakes, or I get to look for a nice bull pintail or something like that. And I do the same thing with specklebelly hunting. A lot of times I like to let them come through. I'll be looking for bands. Heck, those orange feet, and they come in nice and slowly, stick those legs out. If you got good sunshine, it's not too hard to pick them out. Or you look for ones with nice patterns. I mean, they're beautiful birds, and typically, if you get a really nice bird, someone's going to be interested in mounting it. So just my personal opinion, take it or leave it. The thing that I saved last to discuss is calling, and last and least is calling. While specklebellies are extremely responsive to calls, people put a lot of emphasis on it and feel that they have to go out there and make a whole bunch of really high-pitched noise. It kind of sounds like you're jumping on a wood duck or a flock of wood ducks that's stuck under a trampoline. There's a few things that I want to cover when it comes to spec calling. The biggest thing is don't get hung up on it. You can kill specs without a lot of calling. You can keep it very simple and sound like just one or two specklebellies. And if you sound like one or two live geese, really for any waterfowl, whether it's big Canadas or lessers, ducks, snow geese even. I mean, I've had great success mouth calling snow geese, and we'll talk about that later. But if you can sound like a more realistic bird as opposed to just a big wall of super loud noise, you're gonna have more success, okay? So it's not always better to be louder, it's better to be realistic, all right? So when I'm talking about that, I'm going to do some calling here, and I want to talk a little bit about what I'm doing. So the typical snow goose caller, or I'm sorry, specklebelly caller, is going to just go hee hee ha ha into the call, and they're going to be incomplete notes. So I'll give you a little demonstration of that. Now, when you're listening to that, it doesn't sound very realistic. It sounds like a guy on a specklebelly call. But if you don't let that call fall down below the break on the second note of that yodel or third note of that yodel, it'll be much more realistic. And you'll find that it'll help you learn how to control the call. So when I'm talking about that, instead of letting the call break down at the end, make sure that you keep it up above the break. And even that's very rudimentary. There's not a whole lot going on there. I'm not bending notes. I'm not doing anything super fancy. But just that right there is enough to make a difference for you. If you can learn that and a basic string of clucks and learn how to read these SPECKLEBELLIES, you're gonna be way more successful than if you just go out there and make a ton of noise, okay? So I hear guys all the time just go out there and that's not doing anyone any good. That's making a lot of noise. That's making SPECKLEBELLIES wise to anything that sounds like a SPECKLEBELLIE call, and it's making things tough. If you can go out there, and again, I'll keep it pretty basic here with just some clucks and a couple yodels, you're gonna find that you have a lot more success, okay? So just basic clucks and a couple 2- and 3-note yodels will get you by just like this. And that's just the basic stuff. So if you can get that, most of the pitch changes are coming just by using my hand and maybe a little bit of air pressure. Learning how to do something like that, if you spend some time on it, most people will be able to pick something like that up in about a month's time. So it's not terribly difficult. And with more time practicing and listening to these geese, my gosh, so the best thing you can do is go park on the downwind side of a bunch of SPECKLEBELLIES, turn your truck off, roll the window down, and press record on your iPhone. Every phone's going to be able to record something, whether it's with a camera or just on an audio recording, but you're going to learn a lot about what the sounds that these birds make just by listening to them. And with a little bit more time, you can learn how to be more realistic and sound like more and more geese. So your 2 geese turns into 3, turns into 5, turns into a flock. And if you really need to make a lot of noise, once you've got multiple realistic sounds, instead of just stringing together 8- and 10-note yodels that sound like you're blowing a hail call from a duck call into a speck call, it turns into a flock of geese. And in the end, that's what we're looking for. So I'm going to start off, this is just going to be a realistic run of SPECKLEBELLIE sounds, and I'm going to start off soft, and then I'm going to get on them a little bit, and then I'm going to come down and let them finish, okay? And that right there is the result of a lot of years spent practicing calling and listening to geese and having a lot of guys help out. But I've found typically I don't ever have to get as loud as I did and make as much noise as I did there in the middle of that. And just a few realistic noises is more than enough to kill SPECKLEBELLIES. They react very well to calls, and once you find that one note that one bird out of that flock likes, you're set. And with SPECKLEBELLIES, you're typically not calling the whole flock. You just find that one goose that likes the way you sound, and you talk to that goose. You call that goose like it's the only one in the sky, and the rest of them are gonna follow them. That's why we like to keep these babies around, because the babies miss mama, they hear something that sounds delightful, and they are typically in a hurry to get down, and the rest of them will follow. So just a few realistic noises can go a very long way. You're calling it one goose and let him bring the rest in. And it's a lot easier to make too much noise than to make too little noise. So again, just keep that in mind, stay realistic, sound like 1 or 2 real specks, and you're going to go a long way. Okay, so that's going to wrap it up for us, and thanks again, Logan Damon out of Stuttgart, for sending this question in. Go ahead, make sure you get on and send an email to info@divebombindustries.com to make sure you get your hat for your question being used. And if any of you have another question that you'd like me to cover on a future episode of Field Facts with Forrest, I want you to send that directly to me. All right, send that to my email, Forrest, F-O-R-R-E-S-T, at divebombindustries.com. Make sure you include your basic information, your name, where you're from, and then your question. And make sure you give me some details, because I get some guys that say, hey, I've got 5 dozen V2Fs, how do I use them? It's really difficult to answer. So make sure you give me some real details, and I will do my best not only to get your question on an episode here, but no matter who you are or what your question is, I'm going to reply to your email as soon as I possibly can. So go ahead, send those to me at forrest@divebombindustries.com, and then go ahead, like and subscribe to this channel down below, and that way you don't miss out on any more episodes here in the future. Thanks again for watching. I'll catch you next time on Field Facts with Forrest.